to a Hope 1032 podcast.
The Hope Book Club with Katrina Rowe and Natasha Moore, because life's just better with a book.
Welcome to the Hope Book Club with Katrina Rowe and Natasha Moore from the Centre for Public Christianity. And today we're joined by Katrina Clifford, Dean of Robert Menzies College. In episode 39 of the Hope Book Club, we're exploring stories of love in all its forms. Love Stories is the newest release from the best-selling Trent Dalton. The journalist turned novelist collected stories of love from people on the streets of Brisbane. It's all about love in all its different guises and about all the places it can be found in hospital wards, cemeteries, and even on the front of the fridge. Sex and Vanity is Kevin Kwan's latest novel. The author of Crazy Rich Asians has penned a retelling of E.M. Forster's A Room with a View. Once again, it's an uber-rich romance exploring themes of Asian identity, but this time set in Italy. And I've been reading Still Life by Sarah Winman. Featured at the recent Sydney Writers' Festival, this book is also a tribute to E.M. Forster's A Room with a View and even features Forster as a minor character. Set mostly in Italy, it's again a celebration of love in all its forms. But first, let's hear from Love Stories by Trent Dalton.
It's essential to Robert that his skin cancer clinic appointment goes smoothly today, because it's essential to Robert that he spends every day of his retired life in good health beside his wife of 31 years, Julia McCulley. He says I would understand how essential this is to him were I ever fortunate enough to meet Julia McCulley. She's special, he says. How so? I ask. Love follows her around, he says. I smile at this unusual line, and Robert, the retired postman, knows from the way I squint my eyes and bite my top lip and nod my head that I don't fully understand what he means. If you have a lot of love in your life, if you put a lot of love out into the world, then love follows you around, he says with a knowing smile. It follows. I like this notion. What if love was less an idea than a physical thing, as real as air and just as visible? And then I see in my head Robert's version of love as something that floats above us all, like the cartoon scent cloud following Pepe Le Pew through the woods. We all walk in our invisible clouds, and some clouds are bigger than others. Our clouds expand when they brush against or chemically blend with other clouds. That's how Robert and Julia ended up together. He saw her face, she walked ahead, he followed her cloud. Caring people have this sphere around them, Robert says. People feel it and they want to be part of that sphere. That's how it works. That's how caring people move through the world. That's how Julia moves through the world.
That's Love Stories from Trent Dalton, Australia's most in-demand author. After writing 2 revered novels, Boy Swallows Universe and All Our Shimmering Skies, his latest work is a collection of short stories gathered on the street corners of Brisbane. They're all tales of love in its various guises. Natasha Moore is here from the Centre for Public Christianity. G'day, Natasha.
Hey, Katrina.
This is pretty different to Trent Dalton's last 2 books. What's Love Stories about and what inspired this idea?
Yeah, it's an interesting project. And I mean, it is very different to his previous 2 because they were novels and this is not. These are real people's stories, but maybe it's not so far apart as might at first appear. Like, it's still very much his style, his big-heartedness, but this time it's kind of applied to the people of Brisbane. In a way, it's a love letter to the city. So he decided, I guess at some point during 2020, 2021, but like mid-pandemic kind of idea, he was given a typewriter by his friend's mum. She left it to him when she died. And he decided to honour her and the gift by going out. He decided to walk the streets of Brisbane CBD, talking to people, asking for their love stories for 2 months, and then sit on the corner of, I don't know Brisbane very well, but Brisbane listeners will know where this is, Adelaide and Albert Street in the Brisbane CBD. So he sat there for 2 weeks on that corner with his typewriter, again asking random strangers to tell him a love story. And they really, really did. People really open up about their lives, about these incredibly personal, deep things that have happened to them, how they really feel about stuff, who they love and why, and love lost. And it's a bit of a roller coaster ride, to be honest.
I feel like that would be such a beautiful documentary if you could actually see their faces and hear them telling their own story. So is it told through their words, or does Trent kind of rewrite their stories for them?
He very much writes it, threads it all together. He kind of recounts the conversations he has, and he kind of tells their stories. But it's clear from some things that he says. I don't know if he did this in every single case, but I suspect he did, and that this is part of his kind of journalistic and novelistic integrity, is that he has sent them drafts to be like, does this accurately represent your story? Do you feel I've told this right? And inevitably people say that they cried, and whoever they read it with cried. So sometimes he's weaving different people's stories together, and also his own story. Like, because people are so kind of vulnerable and honest and raw with him, he really had to be as open in the writing of it and with them as well. And so he does weave in his love story and eventually convince his wife to contribute her point of view of their story. So it's all very beautiful, very sad, very moving.
Can you give us a few examples of some of the love stories featured in the book?
I can, though, I just feel like I won't do any of them justice. So there's such an amazing range of stories and range of loves. So some of it is, these two best friends who've kind of stuck with one another, these older women who, one of them in particular has had a really difficult time and kind of substance abuse and terrible depression. And this friend has stuck with her and kind of brought her out of being in her head over the years. And he just kind of sees these two women, he sees them greet each other with this enormous hug, and he kind of goes up to them and is like, I'm just wondering what's going on there. Looks like you haven't seen each other for 10 years. And they laugh and are like, oh, we saw each other last Friday. But they just, have such a kind of dependence on each other and affection for each other. He speaks to this young guy who is kind of asking for donations, so has been kind of haunting the same street corners. And if I'm not mixing it up, he's also someone who's, had a teen sweetheart who died of cancer. And there's this woman whose name he changes. Usually they're their real names, clearly, but this one he tells anonymously, and she's 77. She was married, got divorced, amicable divorce, 20 years without kind of thinking that that was it for romantic love for her. And then now is kind of in this tangled love affair with a Catholic priest that she's like, what's going on here? And he's just so open-hearted and non-judgmental and just kind of like, hey, what's going on with you? And people really respond to him clearly. So you have kind of people from across the socioeconomic spectrum, people from all over the world, lots of very young people, lots of very old people, lots of people who have had very kind of interesting and dramatic lives, and then people whose lives have been what you would call really ordinary, but the way that he draws them out and the way that he describes their experiences of love, you're like, everything shimmers in his writing.
Sounds like you really loved it, but I have read in some critiques some people have a sense of dissatisfaction over the fact that they're short stories, they're self-contained, rather than being part of a bigger story. What are your thoughts on that?
I do sort of feel conflicted about this book, right? Like I love his writing and I loved the project and it was really beautiful. I'm unsure how best to read it. Normally I read one book from start to finish. Maybe I'm reading two, a nonfiction and a fiction. But with this one, I just couldn't sit and read long chunks of it because it kind of asks people to distill the lessons of a whole life and the things that are most precious to them. Every short chapter, some are only a few pages, is really intense. and that's really powerful, but it's also, you can only handle so much of it, as opposed to a novel where you have kind of stretches of light and darkness and kind of more ease and then more intensity. The whole thing is really intense. So I kind of started dipping in and out of it because I could only take so much of it at a time. But also some of the stories thread together and different people return. And so then I'd be like, oh, I can't remember who that is. So it's a a complicated book to read in a way. And it's also extremely sentimental. Like he is just so like in love with love and everything, you know, while acknowledging a lot of the darkness of life and people's suffering and experiences. He's also just like such a cheeseball and acknowledges that. And kind of has to be to do this in a way that's not cynical and that really kind of embraces people for who they are. But it's a lot. It's a lot.
Okay. Does he share his own ideas about love?
He does, and he shares some of his own stories as well, his relationship with his father, his relationship with his wife, and his daughters. So I think that kind of works really well. He's obviously thought about these things for himself a lot, and that makes it, you know, it's not kind of journalistic objectivity kind of being removed from the action and not being involved. He's extremely involved and, you know, kind of gets to know some of these people, like sees them again, hangs out with them, helps them out. It's really beautiful, actually. It's kind of a picture of a community, of like a city and the different currents, people interacting and kind of going about their lives and crashing into each other or helping each other.
Well, I was going to ask what you enjoyed about it, but I think maybe I should ask instead, how did it make you feel?
It made me feel quite, I guess, raw and tender. I mean, I'm also reading it having recently got engaged. So maybe I'm like primed to hear all these people's love stories and their like, you know, 40-year marriages and their tragedies and stuff as well. So I think probably at the particular intersection point, crossroads in my life at the moment, I was, primed to really find it deep and meaningful. I love his writing. I think it's really charming, even when it's a little bit over sentimental. He's just a great prose artist. And I loved the genuineness of it. I think I'm a bit more cynical and sarcastic and stuff than he is. And it's kind of a tonic to be like, look, someone who's not jaded. How lovely.
I know this is a little bit inappropriate given you're newly engaged, but did you fall in love a little bit with Trent Dalton reading this?
No, I think I was very happy for like him and his wife I feel like she comes across as maybe a little less cheeseball than him, but also loves him for that. Because I've seen him speak. I loved Boy Swallows Universe, and I heard him speak at the Sydney Writers' Festival after that. And I remember being like a bit like, oh, what a lovely man, like having a bit of a crush on him then. But having met my fiance since then maybe has inoculated me against falling in love with Trent Dalton. I don't know.
I think it's okay to fall in love with authors a little bit, you know, if you've enjoyed their writing. Thanks, Natasha. That's Natasha Moore. We've been talking about Trent Dalton's love stories. Katrina Clifford has been reading Sex and Vanity from Kevin Kwan, the author of Crazy Rich Asians. And this new book is also about the uber rich, or millennials, as I've heard them called recently, those who can dial in a helicopter or go shopping in Paris for a day. But it's based on the Ian Forster classic A Room with a View, which was made into an Academy Award-winning movie back in the 80s. It's a romance set partly in Italy, partly in England, and it's about being able to live fully and freely. Katrina joins us also with baby Eleanor in tow as well. Hi, Katrina.
Hi, Katrina. Yes, I have a
Hi,
little
Eleanor.
friend with me today. She's not waving back.
That's all right. She's adorable. So let's start with A Room with a View. Katrina, are you a fan of that book?
I love A Room with a View. I'm a big fan of Ian Forster generally, and I don't think A Room with a View is his best book, but it's certainly his loveliest. It's a really beautiful novel. It's quite short and easy to read, but this picture of this young girl who's very innocent, who goes off to Italy and encounters people who are different to her and comes back to England with different ways of seeing the world and tries to work out who she is. It's really lovely. And the movie's magnificent. It's got a young Helena Bonham Carter and a young Maggie Smith and a young Judi Dench in it. And it's just the most amazing thing ever. All these beautiful shots of Tuscany and Florence and the English countryside.
And the kiss in the field.
The kiss in the field, absolutely. It's just an incredibly romantic moment.
So tell us about the main characters in Sex and Vanity. Do they sort of line up with the main characters from the book?
Yeah, they do. I think Forster is a brilliant writer. Kevin Kwan is not quite at Forster's standard. And so the characters in Sex and Vanity are not as fully realised as Forster's characters. They're not as deep or as rich or as well-rounded. But they both have a heroine called Lucy who travels to Italy, who meets there a young man called George, who she will not intellectually admit an attraction to, but has some sort of level of underlying attraction to. We have an encounter. It doesn't happen in a field of poppies in Sex and Vanity, but a kind of 21st century version of that. And then we step into the novel a few years later where Lucy has just become engaged to an insufferable man called Cecil, which happens in both novels. So there's a lot of parallels. There's a cousin called Charlotte in both. It's very much a rewriting of A Room with a View, but with quite different, very different cultural setting. A Room with a View is very English. Sex and Vanity is set within this kind of the intersection of the uber-wealthy New York elites and the uber-wealthy Asian and Asian American communities. And Lucy's battle in Sex and Vanity is more about who does she identify with? Does she identify with her kind of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant father's family or with her mother's Chinese American family?
Look, a Room with a View, it's set in Edwardian times. I'm interested to know how that translates to a modern era story. For example, in A Room with a View, the main character, Lucy, has social pressure to marry Cecil instead of George. How do you create that in a modern context, given that if you are wealthy from New York, do you really have those kinds of restrictions and expectations on your behaviour that Lucy is pushing back against in A Room with a View?
Yeah, so the thing about Cecil, he goes from being just a, upper class, very snooty Room with a View character to being a massive Instagram influencer. So everything he does needs to be very highly crafted and very image conscious. And Lucy wants to fit into this world. So Cecil has been labelled the most eligible gentleman by, BuzzFeed or something. And she finds this world very appealing because it's beautiful and it's controlled and every part of it is kind of micromanaged to get that perfect image. And Cecil really loves how she looks and how she fits into the image of this life that he is creating for himself. Whereas George is very much more... Oh, hello, baby. George is very much more real, down to earth. He's a surfy dude. He's grown up in Australia rather than New York. And so has a very different attitude towards life. Doesn't care so much about what things look like, cares more about how things feel.
Now, once again, for Kevin Kwan, because we know Crazy Rich Asians, once again, the characters are crazy rich. Does that make them a bit hard to relate to, or are we not even supposed to like them?
It does make them a little hard to relate to. I think you can choose to find that off-putting, but I think you can also choose to look at the people behind the wealth. One of the things about Cecil is he is so wealthy. There's almost no person behind the wealth. He just is his wealth. Lucy isn't like that. You get the sense of there being a genuine person inside of Lucy. She's very artistic and she's kind of squashed her artistic side in the favour of just kind of being one of these billionaire millennials. And part of the story is about her kind of rediscovering her artistic side, rediscovering the person that she is on the inside, outside of the trappings of wealth. But I do know that a lot of people have found kind of the super rich nature of this book off-putting. I think you need to read it as kind of escapist fantasy and look for the heart in the characters behind the trappings of wealth and the name dropping and the designer clothing and the wealth that is very much on display and very much being critiqued in a kind of humorous sort of way.
So is it romantic? Because the original book and the movie are both quite romantic.
It is and it isn't. I think the relationship between Lucy and Cecil is not particularly convincing, but I don't think it's supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be very superficial. The relationship between Lucy and George is has more to it. But again, it's supposed to be lighthearted fun. This is not Trent Dalton talking to people about their, heart's desires on the street corners of Brisbane. This is very much someone poking fun at a whole society and using these conflicting, contrasting relationships to do so. I quite liked George. Lucy, a bit so on. I think she's got potential there, which hopefully starts to come out towards the end of the novel. You wouldn't call it, it's not primarily a romance novel, I don't think. It's primarily a book about this kind of high society and isn't this life ridiculous? It looks all wonderful from the outside, but actually the people in it are miserable kind of novel, rather than the love story is more a vehicle for that, I think, than anything else.
Okay. One criticism I did read was that the characters were a bit one-dimensional, and some readers who'd loved his previous books were a little disappointed in this. Would you recommend it, and what's good about it?
Yeah, I would recommend it. I think it's not as good as Crazy Rich Asians. Crazy Rich Asians, you get much more of a sense of who the characters are, and I think they are more relatable. I think if you liked the fun and the lavishness and the kind of over-the-topness of Crazy Rich Asians, then you would enjoy this. I think if you have read A Room with a View or seen the movie and liked it and are kind of just interested in how authors play with source material and update it for our 21st century, then I think you'd enjoy this as well. But it's also just a bit of escapism. I read this during a lockdown, and it was just one of those moments of, well, I can't go to Capri and I can't go to New York, so I may as well read a book about them because that's as close. I can't leave my house right at the moment. So it's nice and escapist in that sort of sense, that it gives you this insight into a very different world, a very different sort of lifestyle, which I enjoy. Not everybody does, but I certainly found it fun.
Thanks, Katrina. It's Katrina Clifford. We've been discussing Sex and Vanity by Kevin Kwan, a modern-day retelling of A Room with a View. And so now I wanted to talk about, since we're talking about love and authors' different interpretations and portrayals of love, I wanted to know, have you ever fallen in love with an author? I don't mean this in a literal falling in love with them, but, you had a bit, you've gone to an author event and you've just thought they are a wonderful human being and you'll read everything that they ever write, or you felt really drawn to their character. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I guess we probably already talked about mine. I went and heard Trent Dalton. I think it was kind of his humility that he was really people think I'm good. What? He's like, I don't know if I can write another good book. Actually, at the event, it was in a very large auditorium at Carriage Works in Sydney, and the fire alarm went off in the middle of it, and everyone trooped out. Took forever to troop out, stood around for a while, trooped back in, and he was very kind of, obviously not his fault at all, but very apologetic and disarming and lovely about it, and told some great stories, and was just very warm, which is always nice to see.
Someone that I found really lovely was Lauren Child, who is the author of the kids' books Charlie and Lola, and also she writes kind of older books like Ruby Redford and sort of other sort of spy books and things like that. But I'm always fascinated by authors who can draw as well. So she illustrates what she writes, and there's a beautiful edition of Pippi Longstocking where Lauren Child has done the illustrations in her trademark style, and I've absolutely loved reading that book. And so I was just so thrilled to actually see her, meet her, hear her, and I just thought she was a really amazing and inspiring person. Yeah.
See, now I'm thinking of all these other people. I heard Zadie Smith speak, and she was so eloquent and so elegant, and I was so in awe of her. And George Saunders, who was just so kind of warm and charming as well. Look, I love them all.
Have you heard George? You've heard George Saunders in person, have you as well?
Yeah, also Sydney Writers Festival.
Yeah,
in a different year.
Mine was a Sydney Writers Festival experience too, and Kate DiCamillo was at the same one, and hearing her was pretty fabulous as well. What about you, Katrina?
Look at you cultured people going along to all of these author events. I don't remember the last time I went along to an author event, but if I'm thinking about authors who, when I read their books, I just love them, and the way that they portray people, I'm going to steal a leaf from Natasha and go for Marilyn Robinson, because I think she is just so kind and sensitive and emotionally intelligent about how she portrays the lives of her characters. I'm not as big a Marilyn Robinson fan as Natasha is, but I just love that about that's true. You are the greatest fan ever. I will bow to your superiority.
I'm president
on
of the J Club. Yeah.
But if I'm trying to think of an author who I would just love to have as a friend or a mentor or an auntie or a someone in my life, I was just kind of looking at my bookshelf and going, who do I actually want in my life? I want Marilyn Robinson in my life. So, if we manage to get her to Australia, I will certainly go and listen to her speak.
I'd like to have Alexander McCall Smith as my grandfather.
Oh, yes. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, he just seems like such a lovely man, so sensitive, so compassionate, so thoughtful, so incredibly well educated, so smart, funny, hilariously funny. He's just seems like a perfect person. There must be something wrong with him, but I don't know what it is. Because when I heard him speak at the Sydney Opera House, and I was just in stitches. I liked his book, I enjoyed them, but I was not expecting to spend the entire hour just laughing until my cheeks and my sides ached. It was just really fabulous. So I have been reading Still Life by Sarah Winman. This is a story that starts in World War II. Ulysses is an English soldier from a humble background. Evelyn Skinner is an art teacher from a privileged but bohemian background. They meet in Italy and they share this really intense moment that binds them together when Ulysses actually saves someone's life. And then for most of the rest of the book, their stories are told quite separately. Ulysses' story revolves around a group of friends and an East End London pub. They have this really rough and ready sort of care for each other. But Ulysses' life changes when he inherits a villa in Florence as a direct result of that life-saving moment. And so he starts this new life and a life of abundance that he's never known before. And while he thinks he's sort of leaving his old life behind, it turns out that one by one his friends sort of gradually come and join him, and they each take on, I guess, a more liberated and open personality as they sort of experience this Italian life. So it's quite a cast of characters. I won't go into them all, but one of the sort of central character is Peg, who is this woman whose beauty and singing ability and her attitude sort of captivate all those around her, but she sort of can't seem to break away from some of the controlling men, and she's sort of a bit of a vessel of broken dreams, really. And so Ulysses and Peg are sort of on again lovers, and Ulysses has actually taken Peg's daughter to Italy to give her a new life as well. And so he's sort of the glue binding this cast of characters together. And Evelyn, meanwhile, her story is going on as well. It's sort of background to this. And it all starts with this life-defining moment she had when she was 21. She had this passionate affair with a maid at a hotel she was staying in. The poet Constance Everly was her friend. And in these few days, she was hanging out with Ian Forster. And the encounter with him is sort of, it's fairly forgettable, really, but it seems to be the start of something for Forster in his writing and in his exploration of, love and poetry and all that sort of thing. And so eventually these two characters find their way to each other, and there's sort of a sense of fate about all that. But essentially the book is like a homage to art, to love, to following your passions, and to all the different, I guess, forms of love that these characters experience in their lives. So,
I feel like this one has a really pretty cover.
Oh, yeah, it has. So one of the characters is a parrot, a talking parrot who's kind of magical and predicts the future. There's definitely some supernatural sort of elements. One of the characters has a bit of a second sight where he can predict things, and the parrot has this weird ability to quote Shakespeare that happens to be particularly poignant to the moment. So that's a little bit magical realism, I guess. And there's this abundance of love, and it's like a reminder to live bravely and freely and all that. But I guess one of the little issues I had with this book is that while there's all this kindness and care for each other, as their financial circumstances change, they sort of become richer and life opens up and they become more enlightened. And there's sort of this good life full of food, wine, art, culture, etc. But I feel like those things are almost the goal of life, and the church is sort of seen as a bit of a vehicle of oppression in the book. So the representation of the church in Italy, there's no Jesus in it, and there's no kind of sense of, I guess, the poverty and struggles that are still around them. So yeah, it's definitely a humanist view of life, and a very, I guess they would call it a liberated view of sex and relationships. But I guess I found that there was something missing, and for me that was like the love of God as part of that mix of love for humanity. And in all the freedom, there was almost no limits being put on expression of love and passion, which really, as we know, if there are no limits at all, I think there ultimately will be fallout from that. So, and that's something that's sort of really glossed over.
So it sounds like it would be quite a good book to discuss with people then.
A lot of people love this book, and it's very tender, and the characters are really lovable, and you do come to really care about them. You know, it's definitely a book that's worth reading, but, you know, if you're reading this, I think you do have to sort of engage with the choices that they're making and where that's coming from and where that leads, because I think the book is a little bit idealistic in this idea that everyone just following their passions leads to nothing other than, you know, beauty and humanity, caring for one another, with the fact that there are many, many people for whom the wrongs done to them are very, very hard to overcome.
I find that really fascinating because a big thing in E.M. Forster's novels is kind of the disasters that ensue from people just kind of following their passions, or not even disasters, but just kind of social fallout. And like there are always consequences. No matter which choice you make, there are always consequences. And that can, you know, it's about kind of almost choosing the least bad option in a lot of cases in his novels. So that's really fascinating that she has really included him in her novel in a really kind of significant way, but not taken on that aspect of what he's doing in his novels.
Yeah, it certainly feels like that art is the goal of life rather than art as a means of expressing the complexity of human life, or the difficulties of human life, or the struggles of human life, and all those things. So, but look, there's a lot that is good in there in this book, and there's a lot to enjoy in the book. But for me, it didn't quite ring true. It was a little bit too idealistic in its approach to love and passion and life. All right, well, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Hope Book Club. In this episode, we have reviewed Love Stories by Trent Dalton, Sex and Vanity by Kevin Kwan, and Still Life by Sarah Winman. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. You can contact us, bookclub@hopemedia.com.au. And thanks for listening to the Hope Book Club, because life's just better with a book.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.